Welcome to the Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we're going to talk about being a generous giver. This is a lot of times where the conversation around stewardship starts. But you'll notice we're now several episodes into this conversation. We start with the idea of what stewardship looks like at the high level, that God owns everything. And if God owns everything, then a faithful steward is a diligent earner and a prudent spender. And then when we break down the idea of a prudent spender further, what we see is that a prudent spender is a generous giver first, a wise saver, and a cautious debtor. So that's where we're going the next couple of weeks. But today, we're going to talk about this idea of being a generous giver. We believe at Good Sense that we are all hardwired to be generous. It is God's heart to be abundant and to be generous, and He placed that image in us. Our desire is to help others, to care for others. What makes us feel most human is when we are lifting the burdens of other humans. It's incredibly important that we get experience doing things for others, spending our time caring for others, spending our talents, giving those to others for free, spending our money by giving God's resources to causes and to families and to people who are in need. That generosity is hardwired in our very DNA. It's who we are. It's why it feels so good when we do it, because it's what we're made for. The problem is we end up putting all of that into the when there's extra category. You know, when I have extra time, I'll give it to you. When I have extra space to give you whatever you need in terms of a skill that I can bring, or when I have extra money, then I'll give it to you. But until then, I'll just keep it all for myself. I'll just do the things I want to do with it. And unfortunately, because this is a conversation that doesn't happen very often at the church, unless we're asking for money, we lose sight of the fact that we need to start in the place of being a faithful steward that creates margin. When we are a diligent earner and a prudent spender, the natural outcome of that is that we will experience the extra, and then we will be able to be obedient in the generosity of giving it away, whether that's time, talent, treasure, or I've heard some people refer to it as life, right? That acronym of life is labor, influence, finance, and expertise. Such a great way to think of it. However you want to think about giving, whatever you are giving, it's bigger than just money. That's why stewardship needs to be a bigger conversation than just money. Because when we get to this place of being a generous giver, we are giving from all those different aspects, not just from our bank accounts. One of the things about being a generous giver is the delight that it brings to us. The Bible talks all the time about how God loves a cheerful giver, how giving is sparked from a sense of gratitude, that we have faith in God as the provider. Jesus talks about this all the time. You are the source. And so I don't have to be worried about giving away something that's not mine to begin with. It's so much easier to engage in the act of generosity when you're giving someone else's money away, or when you're giving someone else's time away. When it's someone else's resource, not yours, you're not losing anything. And so it's incredibly important to see these things as His, so that we're in a position of being able to give them away when He asks us to. Generous giving is rooted first and foremost in an awareness that we don't own it. If I were to walk up to someone randomly in the street and hand them a $20 bill and ask them to go give it away, they'd do it in a heartbeat because it wasn't theirs to begin with. I just said, here, give this to that guy. They would do it, right? But if I walk up to someone randomly on the street and I say, give $20 of yours to somebody else, they would have to know why and where's it going to come from and what's it going to go to? And all the questions start to come up. We're the same way. When we see these resources as ours, we will quickly talk ourselves out of being obedient in the act of generosity because we need to figure out, can we afford it? Is it going to put us in harm's way? Are we going to be struggling to make ends meet? Do we have enough? Or we're going to be questioning, is it actually going to work? Is it going to fix the problem? Is it even going to matter if I give my money to this thing or if I give my time to this thing? Is it going to change anything? But when we put ourselves in a place where we have created and recognized the abundance that God has given us, when we put ourselves in a place where we are ready then to obey with that abundance, with his resources, when we see it as his, and he says, give my resources to that person, we don't hesitate. Why would we? It's not ours anyway. And so you can see how incredibly important it is to create this framework, this mindset of stewardship rather than ownership before you get to the question of giving. There's a lot of work that needs to be done before you even start into the conversation of being generous. So now that we've set some of that framework in place, we can dive into the idea of what it looks like to be generous in our giving with financial resources. How do we actually get to a place where giving generously with our finances just becomes a natural rhythm and a natural part of our experience? Money in particular is something that competes. Jesus tells us this very clearly. It competes for our heart. We can't serve both God and mammon. We can't be in this place of worship. We have to choose. And when we recognize that God owns it all, there's no choice. There's no competition. We see all of it as him rather than this stealing of our attention, of our loyalty, of our security. Money is such an incredibly complicated thing emotionally and spiritually because it has in many ways the ability to replace God in our hearts for the thing that we see as source and protector and provider. All of the things that God plays, all the roles that he alone plays, we replace with money. And so giving money away as a heart posture of recognizing I don't need it, it's not mine anyway, is what constantly pulls us back into a place of worship for the true source, the true provider, the true protector, the true source of security, because we don't need this other thing. Generosity is not important just because it feels good, although it does. It is important because it aligns our heart correctly. It gives us an awareness of where it all comes from in the first place, and it acknowledges his ownership and our freedom to obey with whatever he wants us to do with his stuff. So let's talk a little bit about how we create this abundance. Through this process, we've talked about the idea of being a diligent earner and a prudent spender. And when those are combined in the idea of a lifestyle cap where we say, this is enough. I know what contentment looks like. I've chosen what I'm going to spend ahead of time. I've been intentional with my earning. I know what life costs. And so I know when there's extra. That extra can be placed in something we like to call an abundance fund. The abundance fund is nothing fancy. This is not a magical tool. This is not a donor advised fund. This is not a big idea. It is a simple concept. It's just a checking account that you intentionally put that extra in, and then you wait for God to tell you what he wants you to do with his abundance. It changes everything. It's such a simple thought, but it changes everything because it allows people to have the freedom and the confidence to step into obedience in the moment. When they're at the gas station and someone pulls up on the other side of the pump in some really dilapidated car and it's clear that they're struggling and God says, buy that person's tank of gas. You don't hesitate. When you're in line somewhere and someone in front of you is fishing around to be able to come up with enough change, you just pay the bill. When you see someone at a restaurant struggling with something and having a really hard emotional argument, maybe you pick up the tab, whatever. Like, there's so many opportunities for God to break into those moments and say, be a part of this. Join me. Link arms with me in the work I'm doing in this person's life right now. And you can say yes, because you know where it's coming from. It's coming from the extra. It's coming from the abundance. We already set it aside. We've already earmarked it. We've already said, this is ready. My wife will come home from a conversation she had with somebody where somebody was having a really hard time. And she's like, so I bought that thing, or I wrote a check, or I made that go away, or I gave to the cause that, gave enough money to help them do what they need to do. And I'm just high five. We're celebrating. There's no, where's it going to come from? How are we going to afford it? What's this going to look like? We already knew it was there. We already were ready for this. All we were waiting for was God's direction. We already knew his provision was more than adequate, right? This is what needs to change in order to give us the freedom to step into obedience. We tend to call people to giving from a place of discipline, right? And I'm fine with that. The scriptural standard of you should give a tithe and 10%. And our argument would be, yeah, 10% is a great place to start. It's a terrible place to stop. Keep going. Because if you have set a lifestyle cap, if you have said enough is enough, if you've drawn that line and there's more than enough extra, you can be so much more lavish in your giving. And we're not just talking about charitable contributions to organizations. We're talking about life on life generosity, giving time because you have margin in your time because you're stewarding it well, giving your resources, your financial resources because you've set aside that abundance, giving your skills and expertise because you have the margin to be able to have those conversations because you're not overcommitted and overextended in any of these areas. You're being a faithful steward. Generosity becomes available and fun and engaging because we are stewarding well. And so we need to have the stewardship conversation in order to unlock the obedience and the discipline of giving. We tend to start the other way around. We start this conversation by saying, you need to give because you're supposed to. And that's true. But if we actually reframe the conversation and start at a higher level and say, you need to be a faithful steward because it's what God's calling you to, then the obedience of giving and being generous falls out of that naturally because you feel the sense of abundance and extra, and you have the confidence to give it away. We are big believers at Good Sense that if we get the first couple of these things right, the generosity conversation goes so much smoother and is so much easier for them to grab hold of because they see that there is an abundance. They see that obedience leads to this beauty and this delight, and I get to feel the incredible rush and exhilaration of linking arms with the King of the universe in the work he's doing in the lives of his people. It's an amazing opportunity. And so obedience doesn't become this drudgery and this sacrifice and this sense of, oh, if I have to. Obedience becomes this opportunity to learn what the voice of the Lord sounds like and act in the moment he is asking us to. Being a generous giver is the life that God has always wanted because it's who we are designed to be. But we would argue you can't get there with starting from a place of discipline and directive and forcing obedience. When you start from a place of faithful stewardship, you're asking the question, what's breaking your heart, God? What do you want me to do to be part of fixing those problems? How do the passions that you've placed in me align with the work that you're doing? And now that I've established this extra, now that I've said enough is enough, now that I'm stewarding my time and my resources well, I can join you in obedience, in giving. And that is when we really unlock something that goes far beyond a tithe, far beyond just a basic obedience to a biblical mandate. This is why we we want the church to step into this conversation. This is why we are so passionate about equipping you to have the confidence to step into this conversation, because when the conversation around stewardship is mostly rooted in building campaigns and fundraising and organizing around a new project or a new outreach or a new way to do kingdom work, and that's the only time we talk about it, we haven't prepared the community to be faithful stewards who are ready to act when those times come. If we don't lay the groundwork over the course of the years and we're doing this conversation regularly, then we're setting them up for failure. We're setting them up to feel a sense of guilt or shame that they're not participating, or to be reminded that they don't have extra, or to give them a sense of self-loathing that they're spending on things that are indulgent and things that they enjoy. That we want them to be engaged in faithful stewardship so that some of those issues are resolved. They wrestle some of that stuff to the ground before we come to them and say, join us in this opportunity to be generous in this outreach to the community, or in this opportunity to expand our community by building a bigger building, or having more space to gather, or offering a soup kitchen, or whatever the opportunity is that you see in front of you. If you've not laid the groundwork for your community to be ready by being faithful stewards, then it's no wonder none of us want to talk about this topic. It's no wonder that we want to avoid the conversation, because we tend to only have it when we need it, and they only hear it when we need it. And it's in this context of discipline and obedience, and you need to step into generosity, but we haven't prepared them to want to. And that's why this is so important. I know it's intimidating. I know that it's scary. I know that in general, church leadership does not want this to be a topic that they cover, because it feels icky, it feels complicated, it feels overwhelming. But this is the church's wheelhouse. This is the work we need to do. We need to steward our people. We need to lead our communities faithfully. And that looks like talking about these things. That looks like leading them where you've gone yourself. It looks like implementing these types of approaches, this idea of stewardship in your life, in your family, and then being able to turn and say, hey, let's do this together. Let's live generously, because we've set ourselves up to do that. This is an issue of Christian discipleship. This is an issue of walking closer and closer to Jesus in this beautiful experience of his abundance, hearing his voice, obeying in the moment. This is what all of the members of your community have access to if we give it to them. If we're willing to have the courage to talk about a topic that's uncomfortable, that might be a little clunky, might be a little awkward, the key that you're using to unlock this gate opens up to a beautiful experience of freedom and fearlessness and confidence and steadiness in an environment where they're experiencing the opposite of all those things. I hope you have an opportunity to step further into generosity. I hope that you've been able to see how mapping these things out and being intentional and creating that margin then opens you up to giving it away more aggressively, more recklessly, and more delightfully as you link arms and do what the Master is asking you to do with his resources, and then teach others to do the same. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.